G'day, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, last week I made a video on my channel in which I made a prediction about a new audiobook that TJ Kirk has slowly started releasing onto the internet. And I made a prediction in my video that I don't think this little endeavor of his is really going to get very far, and I outlined my reasons why. Now, lo and behold, TJ Kirk, the man himself, the Amazing Atheist, saw the video and responded to it pretty quickly. He gave a lengthy response. It's about 40 minutes. I'll post a link in the description below. It's a pretty strongly worded and uncompromising and very vitriolic in places sort of response. And as I said, he was really quick off the mark, which to me, I could be totally reading this wrong, but to me it indicates that maybe my video struck a little bit of a nerve, and that's why he was so quick and so strong with his denouncements of what I had said in my video. Now, I sat down and I thought to myself, well, what do I do now? And I watched his video multiple times. I took notes about all the things that perhaps he didn't quite get right, or that I needed to respond to, or I thought I needed to respond to. And I got to the end of that process and I realized, man, this video is just going to be way too long if I respond to every single point. And so at that point I thought, well, maybe there's no point. I should just sort of let sleeping dogs lie. I've said my thing, he's said his thing, and let's just quit now while we're all ahead. However, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, no, I think it's worth responding to him. And then I realized that the way I could do it was simply by focusing in on what I think are 4 key points that he makes. Well, 3 key points, and one of them's a question. And if I create a video that responds to those 4 key issues, then we won't be here all day, and I can say what I need to say in response to TJ. And I think it's worth responding because I think dialogue, even with people who you might disagree with really strongly, is still an important thing to have happening in our societies. And so those of us who are in a position to have dialogue should actually engage in dialogue rather than running from it 100 miles an hour. Before I get into these 4 main points, a couple of other things I want to start with. Firstly, some apologies. I think that if you make mistakes, and you're going to be a real man about it, you have to own your mistakes. And maturity is about putting right those mistakes. And if that means you have to say sorry to someone for something you've got wrong, then you say sorry. So, TJ, I'm sorry. There are a couple of things that I got wrong in my video, and it's important that I put them right by starting off this video by saying sorry for the mistakes that I made. Now, the reason I make mistakes in my videos is because I don't script my videos. There's literally, of the entire catalogue of videos on this channel, there is literally probably less than a handful of videos that are scripted. I don't really like that style, and so I've only done it very few times. My preference is for a more conversational and dialogue style of video making. And so what I do is I don't script my videos. I sit down, I think about a concept or a response and some key points I want to make. I turn those key points into just a couple of little notes that sit on a computer screen beside my camera. They're little prompts that might be a word or a phrase or a sentence that reminds me of the key points I want to make. And then I just turn on the camera and I start filming. It's not scripted. It's all just natural dialogue, conversational style video making. And I prefer to do that. And I think a lot of people who come to my channel enjoy that aspect of the way I make my video content. Now, the advantage to that is obviously it is more natural and there's a conversation sort of feel to it. It's also means that there is a chance for perhaps some impromptu gold, if you like, to come out of things that aren't so tightly prescribed. However, there are also some risks, and one of the risks is that you just start shooting from the hip, and that's exactly what happened in that video that I made about TJ Kirk's audiobook. I started shooting from the hip in a couple of places, and when you do that, you stop looking at your target, and often you don't really think about what you're saying. And so when you shoot from the hip, you make mistakes. However, I'm not going to stop this conversational style of filmmaking, this dialogue style of video making and YouTube engagement, because I think that in an age where people's speech is just far too tightly policed and restricted, and people are so scared to speak their mind, the last thing we need is people who are just petrified to the point where they think I've got to script every single little thing out just in case I make a mistake and the baying mob come after me or I lose my job. I think we've got to actually have the fearlessness and the freedom to actually have a conversation. And conversations are sloppy, messy things, and people make mistakes. They don't always get everything right. But I'm a big fan of the sort of Socratic questioning dialogue style and approach to these sorts of matters. And I think that if you engage in genuine dialogue, even with people you disagree with strongly, you've got to have the freedom to make mistakes, and it's by making those mistakes that you learn and you develop and you come closer to the truth. But if we're not allowed to make mistakes and we're punished and we're brutalized for even making mistakes or getting things wrong, then what happens is people just stay in their silos, they stay silent, and they remain in their ignorance because they're too scared to even engage in a discussion. So I'm not going to stop doing that. However, as I said, I shot from the hip in my last video and I made some mistakes. So here's a couple of things that I need to apologize to you for, TJ Kirk. First of all, my comment about the low-hanging fruit. That was me shooting from the hip, and you're right, you do go after more than just low-hanging fruit. Like I said, I was shooting from the hip. Effectively, I let my emotions get the better of me, and I made a comment that wasn't an accurate reflection of the fact that you do tackle more than just the simplistic and easy challenges perhaps to your worldview or atheism or whatever it is that you might be tackling in a particular video. Secondly, my comment that you misconstrued at one point in the video about how it takes no skill to go after the low-hanging fruit. Now, in your response, you indicated that you thought that I had said that you've got no skill whatsoever and it doesn't take any skill to do what you do. Now, that's not what I meant, and I don't believe that for a second. You clearly do have skill. You have some technical skills, you've got some marketing abilities, and I think overall you are a theatrical showman. It's what you do. You put on a show and you're very good at that. And I don't for a second believe, or never did I mean to actually suggest that you have no skill. What I meant by that comment was that people who go after low-hanging fruit, it doesn't take any sort of philosophical or intellectual or sort of argumentative skill, if you like, to go after the low-hanging fruit. It's the easy stuff. It doesn't take a lot of effort to do that. So that's what I was referring to. I wasn't meaning, and again, I apologize because of the way that I was shooting from the hip if that came out as if I believe that you don't have any skill whatsoever. That's clearly not true. And lastly, the comment that I made about this being purely a cynical marketing ploy. I'm sorry, I really have no proof for that whatsoever. This is a classic example of me just shooting from the hip. I looked at all the pieces on the board and I thought to myself, I'm going to make an assumption about what's going on here. And as I said, it wasn't fair of me to do that because I don't have proof that that assumption is a valid one. And I'm prepared to take you at your word when you say that this isn't just a cynical marketing ploy. And it clearly does, in hearing your response, it does seem to me very clear now that you are passionate about your disagreement with what Peterson has to say, and that's the position that you're coming from. This isn't just some sort of cynical attempt to position yourself in the marketplace. And by the way, you're not correct, TJ, when you say that if this was just sort of cynical marketing, then what you would probably be doing was copying or mimicking Peterson. That is one way to try and get yourself a bit of the market share, by copying, putting your finger up in the air and saying, well, where is the wind blowing? And I'll go wherever the wind blows. Another way of gaining yourself a bit of market share is to deliberately position yourself as being contrarian. And that's what I meant by the term contrarian. I didn't mean that you can't ever criticize Peterson. I'll talk more about that in just a second. What I meant was that you deliberately position yourself as being contrary to what is the flavor of the month, and you say, hey, look at me, I've got something totally different. I have a new and divergent market, and you should come and invest in my new and divergent market. So there are two ways of doing that, not just one. I think you'll probably agree with that. However, as I said, I was wrong to suggest that this was purely a cynical marketing ploy on your part. Shooting from the hip, I got that wrong. So, apologies out of the way. Before I get into the 4 key points that I want to address, here's just a couple of other little things that I want to respond to before we get started into the main heart of today's video. First of all, as I said just previously, yes, you can criticize Jordan Peterson. I do not believe, and if you go back and look at my video, not once did I say that you are not entitled or no one is allowed to ever criticize Jordan Peterson. I don't believe that anyone is above criticism. I believe that, especially if you are going to engage in the marketplace of ideas, then people should be free to think critically, to bring good philosophical skills and good sound understandings to bear, and then if they have disagreements, to actually voice those disagreements. I think this is, dialogue, conversation. It's so fundamental to a good, healthy, vibrant society. So I don't believe for a second that Jordan Peterson is somehow above criticism. He's not infallible, and there are things that Peterson says that I disagree with. That wasn't the point of my video. So as I said, when I was talking about being a contrarian, what I was talking about was just positioning yourself in the market as someone who's contrary to the main thing. I did not mean that it is wrong and you're not allowed to, and no one has any right to ever criticize Peterson. I don't believe that for a second. Second point, no, Jordan Peterson is not my daddy. And I guess this is more of a comment directed at all the TJ Kirk disciples who turned up on my channel and kept making comments about Jordan Peterson being my daddy, usually followed up with some weird homoerotic comments about oral sex and incest, but there's enough of them on my channel, and it's an indication, it's part of sort of what the video response you gave to me as well. No, he's not my daddy. I'm a guy who was really blessed to have a good father. My father died in January of this year, and my dad was a good man, and he taught me so many essential lessons that have stood me in good stead in my life. My dad wasn't an academic. He was a simple guy. He was a farmer, but he had a real good practical wisdom about life. And so, and he loved us. He made his mistakes, but he loved us as a father. And so I had good fatherly input. So no, Jordan Peterson is not my daddy. For me, Jordan Peterson is a guy who has some really good ideas that I think are worth listening to. He's a guy who I think is worth listening to because I think he gets more right than he gets wrong. And for me, that's, I guess, a bit of a gold standard. The people that we should look to are the people who are offering us wisdom. Now, I know you scoffed at one point in your video when I said the word wisdom, but I still think wisdom is such an essential thing. And this is about having the humility to learn from others and accept that others do have good ideas. And I think the test for me is the people worth listening to are the ones that have more good ideas than bad. They are more consistently getting things and presenting things in a way that is wise, that is sound, that is well thought out than the people who are not doing any of those kind of things as their sort of standard operating procedure. So no, he's not my daddy. Which brings me to a specific point that you made in your video. And I want to play now a clip from your video response to me, and then I want to respond to what you've said. Now, for those who are watching this video, I've created a time-stamped version of TJ's response video. So if you want to, you can go and check for yourself exactly the context and what was happening around the comments that TJ makes. At any point, I use a clip in this video from his response video. You'll see the timestamp across the bottom, and that corresponds to the exact point in his response video where this particular statement was made. So you can go and check it for yourself, you can see the context, and you can know that I'm not trying to edit this or cherry pick and edit his video in a way that's selectively unfair and misrepresents what he's actually saying. So let's watch this little clip where he talks about Jordan Peterson and daddy issues. I mean, think about the fact that Jordan Peterson is now often regularly being referred to as like a father figure or a father to people who perhaps have missed out on fathering or good fatherly input and advice. And I think that's probably a pretty good summation and description of what Peterson does for a lot of people.
So, and you don't see a problem with that, right? You don't see a problem with, hey, this guy is setting himself up as a father figure to the disenfranchised. But if you're taking some Canadian professor and saying, this is my daddy now, he's like my father, then you got problems. You got problems that can't be solved by a self-help book.
Okay, so a couple of points in response to that. First of all, Jordan Peterson, as far as I can tell, hasn't sought out or set himself up to be the father of the nation, as you imply in this response here. He has simply set about writing a book that contains wisdom that he thinks is worthy of people understanding and implementing in their lives. And guess what? A lot of people have looked at what he has to offer and they've said, you know what? This actually makes sense. A lot of people have applied the principles that he has suggested and they are finding merit in them. But as far as I can tell, Peterson hasn't come out there and said, hey everyone, I'm the new daddy. I am your daddy now and you should start following me. He hasn't set himself up as a messianic type figure at all. So that's an unfair characterization. Second of all, I don't actually think it's problematic at all for people to look at another person who has experience and who is offering wisdom and say, that person was like a father figure to me. I don't have a problem with that at all. In fact, for a lot of people, especially those who have experienced brokenness in their parental relationships, we know how fundamentally important parenthood is. The importance of having a mother and a father who love and who transmit important things that you need to know about life to you is essential. It's absolutely essential to the well-being and to your healthy development as a human person. So I don't have a problem at all. If someone has experienced parental dysfunction in their life. They never knew their dad. Their father was different. They never had a father figure in their life. And so they never experienced some of those fundamental and key principles about how to live a good, stable, meaningful, and responsible life, how to be a responsible, upstanding member of the community. They never got that from anywhere. And so they've found this guy who happens to be an expert in his field and who has some wise things to say, and they have realized that this guy is like a father figure to them. There is no problem at all with that. It's really important that people, if they don't have a good, healthy relationship or a good experience or a healthy, non-dysfunctional experience of fathering in their life, that they actually get that role model to them from somewhere. So why wouldn't it be from here? Seriously, what's the possible problem here at all? And you could do far worse if you're looking for someone to actually model your life on or look to for advice. There are plenty of really, really bad examples that you could be looking to that are far worse, and which you should rightly say, hey, that's not a good role model. But I really struggle to see why Peterson would not be someone suitable, or why there would be a problem at all if someone had dysfunction in that area of their life, seeking out that wisdom from another source. That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, unless, of course, TJ, you believe that people should be stuck in their dysfunction for the rest of their lives, and that you only get one chance at fatherhood, and if your biological father, if he makes a mess of it, then, well, too bad, you're stuck with what you've got, and no one should ever help you out of that predicament, or you should never experience the benefit, perhaps, of someone providing a fatherly type role model to you to displace or to replace what was lacking in your life. Quickly after that point, you then go on to make this point. I'll play this last little clip again about the self-help book.
You got problems that can't be solved by a self-help book. Which, let's be real here, that's what Jordan Peterson's book really is. It's just a bad self-help book masquerading as some sort of philosophical fucking treatise.
And in response to this, I say, TJ, well, if Jordan Peterson's book is nothing more than a cheap self-help book and there's something wrong with self-help books, then what do you call your audiobook? You have explicitly stated in your videos twice now that your book, you hope, will offer tools to people. Surely that's the very description of a self-help book. A self-help book contains tools, practical advice which you can take if you want to. And by the way, nowhere does Peterson say that his book is the absolute essential guide to life. It's the only guide to life, that everyone must adhere to it. Not in the slightest. It's very much presented as, here are 12 helpful rules that you might find helpful, right? That's how it's presented. But how is that any different to what you are doing? You, again, this is a contradiction here. You are creating a book which you have described on a couple of occasions as, it's your hope that it will provide tools to people if they're interested in taking up those tools and using them. Well, what's a tool? A tool is something that you use to correct a particular dysfunction, right? That's what a tool is. You've got a dysfunction, you've got something that's broken, that's not working the way it should. You take the correct tool, you apply it to the dysfunction or to the brokenness or a set of tools, and lo and behold, you fix the problem, right? That's the very definition of self-help. Now, it seems to me you're just arguing semantics here, because Jordan Peterson didn't call his rules tools, and you're calling your rules tools. It seems to me that this is total semantics, because effectively all Peterson is doing is the exact same thing that you are claiming that you're going to do in the self-help book that you're writing. You're going to offer people tools, and it's up to them. They can take it or leave it where they want those tools, sure, but you're still going to offer them tools, right? A tool and a rule are the same thing in this context. They are an objective thing that you take and you apply to an area of dysfunction in your life, if you want to, and when you do that, it is the belief of the author or the person who is offering you this rule or this tool that will fix the dysfunction, or you will find some sense of, in your words, contentment, right, by doing these things. So again, this to me points back to this, I guess the original point I was making in my first video was that there are contradictions here, TJ, and this latest response video is just adding to the contradiction, and I think it's just pure semantics to claim that your book doesn't fall into that same category if, as you claim, unless you're not telling the truth now, as you claim, your book is actually going to offer people tools. So with that out of the way, let's get into the 4 key things that I want to really respond to in a little bit more detail in TJ Kirk's response video that he made directed at me. The first point is this claim that he makes that somehow I am closed-minded. Now, this is an accusation that he makes. He made it several times in the video, and it's an accusation that keeps coming back in my comment section from people who just disciples of TJ Kirk's. They watch the video, they get on my channel, and they effectively just parrot what he said. I guess they don't realize that I've actually seen TJ Kirk's response, and so I know that that's not an original thought when you call me closed-minded because I haven't read TJ Kirk's audiobook. Here's the problem with that. There is no audiobook to read. All there is the introduction to the audiobook. And I did not respond to TJ Kirk on this particular issue until I had listened to his video. I watched his video several times and then I responded. So by watching his video several times, I have read or listened to in its total entirety the fullness of this book as it currently exists. It has not been written yet. So all I've got to go on is what TJ Kirk is slowly dribbling out into the public arena. And so far, at the time of recording this video, he's put the introduction out there. Now, I didn't criticize him or make my prediction before I had listened to that video. I actually sat down and I listened to it. I listened to it with an open mind because I was genuinely interested what sort of tact he was going to take. And by the time I'd got to the end of his video, which is just about 18 minutes or so long, it was very clear to me that there were some issues here that were definitely going to affect this particular book, this audio book. And so I made a video prediction. That's all I did. In fact, it's in the title of my video if you go and look at it. I didn't say this book will definitely fail. In the video title, I talk about here's why I think this endeavor is not going to get very far. It's a prediction. Now, making a prediction does not make you closed-minded. If I hadn't listened to your introduction and then I'd made all sorts of guesses or proclamations about you, that would be closed-minded. But I'm not being closed-minded. I've listened to what you've got to say so far. There is nothing more to hear right at this stage, unless you've released it secretly and no one knows about it. I've listened to the entirety of the book as it exists. I didn't comment before. I'd actually listened to your video in full. And then when I did, my video was making a prediction. I am ready, and it's quite possible that I'll be proved wrong, that this audio book will turn out to be one of the greatest moments of critical literature that's ever been produced. I don't think it will, but I could be wrong, and that's the beauty. All I've done here is made a prediction based on some of the problems I already see cropping up in the first opening introduction to this little book. And there's no way does that make me closed-minded at all to take what you've already put out into the public square on this issue, examine it in detail, which is what I did, and then respond to it and make a prediction. Like I said, my prediction could be proved totally wrong, and I'm okay with that because I'm not actually closed-minded about this, despite what that you've claimed in your response video, TJ. The second point I want to respond to in your video is your claim that you make that is quite clearly false, by the way, and easily to show. I think it's easily to prove that it's false, that there is that meaning isn't real, that meaning is purely a social construct. It's nothing more than the subject applying something they want to see in the world around them. So they look at the world or a particular piece of art or whatever it is, and then they apply meaning to it, and they say this has profound meaning and importance. And I would argue that is clearly not true. There is actual profound meaning that can be found in the world. Meaning isn't purely a social construct. It really isn't. And I would argue that the evidence that it's not purely a social construct is the fact that if I was to be transported back in time somehow and I was to communicate with someone who lived 1,500 years ago, I could have a conversation with them, and let's assume they were in a completely different part of the world, obviously a completely different time and completely different culture. However, if I could communicate with them, I spoke their language or had a translator of some kind, then guess what? We could sit down and we could actually have a conversation where we would both understand and know exactly what we were talking about if we started discussing the concept of meaning. Meaning is universal, it is timeless, it is a real thing. And this is evidence of this. The fact that you could actually have that dialogue with someone. I could do that today with someone from a completely different culture, with completely different worldviews to me. I can still have a discussion about the very concept of meaning. And that concept is not purely a social construct. We both know what is being talked about there once we both have agreement on the language used to describe that concept of meaning. It's universal and it's timeless. Now, if I was to go back 1,500 years and talk to someone in that same situation, they wouldn't understand democracy. If I started talking to them about democracy, they wouldn't understand what that concept meant. They wouldn't understand if I started talking to them about the internet or MacBook Pros. That would be totally irrelevant to them. But the concept of meaning, as I said, it's universal and it's timeless. And that indicates what? That it is a real thing. The search for meaning in the human experience is a profound part of what it is to be human. And this is why I guess I made my original video, was because I think in effect that what you're trying to do, TJ, is you're trying to exempt yourself from the norms of reality. Effectively, you're trying to say, well, no, there is no meaning at all. And if you realize there is no meaning, you'll find contentment. Again, I'm quoting you from your own original video where you talked about you hope that if you see the world the way that you do, or you understand what TJ Kirk has to offer in this audiobook, you will find contentment.
I hope very much that it will bring you contentment, or at the very least, stimulate you in some capacity.
Now, surely the fact that you are telling people that you hope they will find contentment implies very, very strongly a sense of meaning, that an actual substantial thing that we refer to as meaning, that they will find some form of meaning in this, right? Contentment is not just happiness. You can be unhappy and content. Contentment is not just pleasure, which is fleeting and which comes and goes. Contentment is something much deeper than that. And contentment is really intimately tied to this idea that you have realized that, hey, there is a truth about the world and the way that it is, and you have accepted that truth. You're not trying to fight against it anymore. You've conformed yourself to it, and guess what? Things are just a whole lot more peaceful now. I'm a lot more contented because I have figured out what? The meaning of life, if you want to use that phrase. So I would argue that it simply isn't sound to try and position yourself and say, oh no, there is no meaning at all. Even if every individual subject found their sense of meaning fulfilled in different places, that doesn't mean that meaning is not actually a substantial and real thing, right? Clearly, the fact that people can experience it indicates that there's something important going on here. Think of something, a parallel, like a parallel desire in all of us. The desire we call hunger, the desire for food. There is a real object called food that can satisfy that desire. Now, just because every single person finds their hunger is satisfied by different types of food, that doesn't mean that food is not a real thing, or that hunger is not a real thing, and that being satiated from your hunger and feeling satisfaction is not a real thing, right? Just because each subject might find a different type of food, the thing that actually fixes and remedies their hunger. And the same is true, I would argue, with meaning. The fact that we seek it out, and not just that, but there does seem to be certain consistent traits, if you like, certain activities, certain things or states in life where people consistently report a greater sense of meaning is found in those things. One of the common things that you'll find is people who have found that, or have a realization that their life is actually a life of substance, that it has contributed something, that it contributed something substantial. They haven't just been going through the motions, that there is a sense that their life has actually created or left a legacy of some kind that actually is going to make some kind of difference, even if it's a small difference just in the lives of various individuals, right? People talk about this often in relation to the workplace, this idea that their job, is not just menial, it's not just meaningless, they're not just going through the motions, that they are actually doing something that has an effect, that has some substance to it in the world, right? Another one is the whole idea of self-sacrifice, when you give of yourself consistently. Like one of the most obvious and clear examples of this is in parenthood and motherhood and fatherhood. So many people find a deep sense of meaning in the act of fatherhood and motherhood, even if they find it difficult, even if they don't feel that they're a natural, they're able to look back on the contribution they've made and see that there was something profound and important that they have done there by participating in the activity or the state of life that we call motherhood or fatherhood. There does seem to be certain things which do almost seem to solidify and give meaning to our lives, and they are consistent across time and across cultures, and parenthood is one of those things. What that indicates is that Jordan Peterson is actually right when he says that there are some basic things and truths that you can know about the world, and that if you cling on to these truths and you apply these truths in your life, then you are probably also likely, like most other people are throughout human history and across cultures and everything else, to find a sense of meaning and contentment in this life. And I really don't understand why that would be an issue at all. I really don't understand what the problem would be here. And as I said, I just don't think it is all philosophically sound to claim meaning is not a real thing, or that there is no, I guess, bigger meaning to be found in life, that it's purely just what you think and what you take from life. The fact that we have meaning as a concept means that it is something that does exist. And in fact, if we were to talk about a person's life and talk about the fact that they'd fallen into a state of meaninglessness, we would probably be concerned by that person, because we would recognize straight away that there is a dysfunction that has crept into their psychology there, that you shouldn't actually see life as meaningless. That's not a healthy state for a human person to actually be in. The fact that we view the world that way, I would argue, is more than just a social construct. It's not something we've been told to think. It's something instinctively we know about the world. And the reason we instinctively know that about the world is because, in actual fact, there is meaning to be found, and that meaning is substantial and it is real. And so when we see someone who has lost touch with the very concept of meaning and has fallen into this belief that all is meaningless, we would generally say, no, that is not a healthy pathology at all. This is not a good psychological state to be in, and we need to help them remedy it. Point number 3 that I want to respond to is closely related to point number 2 about meaning, and it's about hope. And this is, let me quote exactly what you've said in your video.
I don't want people to be hopeful. Hope is a lie. It's better for them to accept the hopelessness of their situation and react accordingly. Is it really that controversial of an idea that people should accept reality the way it actually is?
First important point to make here is this. You have just declared to us that your personal belief that there is no hope and that there is no meaning in this life, you've just told us that this is reality. Well, hold on a minute. Isn't this the same TJ Kirk who just minutes before in his own video was declaring that you have never known truth?
This is called Truth by Stephen Crane. And it's one of my favorite poems. Truth, said a traveler, is a rock, a mighty fortress. Often have I been to it, even to its highest tower, from whence the world looks black. Now that's Jordan Peterson. Here's the poem's not done yet. Truth, said a traveler, is a breath, a wind, a shadow, a phantom. Long have I pursued it, but never have I touched the hem of its garment. That's me. And I believed the second traveler, for truth was to me a breath, a wind, a shadow, a phantom, and never had I touched the hem of its garment.
You quoted that poem, and you claimed that you were like the author of that poem, and that you had never even come close to knowing the truth. Well, if that's true, then why are you now declaring that your personal belief about hopelessness and meaninglessness being the order of life, and that's all there is to it, why are you now declaring that that's true, that that's reality, right? Because that's what you're declaring when you say that this is reality. It also raises an interesting point about the contradictory nature of what you're trying to claim when you talked about that poem. Because if you've never even come close to knowing truth in your life, then is it true that you've never actually known truth in your life? Because if it is true that you have never known truth in your life, and you, TJ Kirk, know that to be true, then you have actually known truth in your life. You see, this is one of the problems with, I think, with postmodernism. When you stop and think about it for more than 5 minutes, you realize that it's not this objective, unbiased, sort of independent observer that's going to tell you what's what. Instead, it is a philosophy, a framework, a set of rules that are believed by certain people about life. But when you stop and think about those rules and that philosophy, you start to realize how contradictory and at times self-evidently self-refuting this thing actually is, right? And this is just one example of that. Second problem here is that clearly it is simply false, and I would say absurdly false, to make the claim that hope is a lie. Just stop and think about that claim for more than 5 seconds, and I'm sure you'll see what the problem is. What is hope? Hope is nothing more than the belief that things can improve or can get better or can be improved from their current situation. That's all that is. Now, that's not a lie. If you believe in something that is real, now there are certain things you can hope for or hope in that are absurd. However, hope is not a lie just because people can have certain hopes that might be absurd. Hope itself is still very real. It is completely false to claim that hope is a lie. And not only that, but I don't even think you really believe that. If you do, we've got a big problem, because in your original video, you said that your hope, and let me quote you here.
I hope very much that it will bring you contentment.
Now, you were referencing here your own audiobook that you're writing about Peterson, and you told your audience that you hope it will bring them contentment. That statement, that simple statement there, implies two things. Contentment, as I've already referred to, implies a sense of meaning, right? That you've found the answer to what is life all about. Well, the answer is there is no answer, right? That's the claim here, surely, because how else do you find contentment, right? You accept what you call reality. Secondly, you have declared to your audience that you hope that this work, for those who are interested in obviously reading and engaging with it, you hope this will bring them contentment. Well, how can you hope if hope is a lie? And why would you say that if hope was a lie? Seriously. The reason you'd make that statement is because you know, instinctively, just like everyone else who is rational and who is thinking well, that hope is a real thing, that hope isn't actually a lie, and that it is possible to have a belief that things can be improved in some way, even if it's only small, from their current situation. And that belief is what we call hope, and that it's possible to achieve in a lot of situations and circumstances that sort of improvement, so that hope isn't a lie, either as a concept or even in practice. It's possible to actually hope for something and achieve it, and hope is clearly real. It's the belief that we have that things can be improved in some way. And the last point I want to respond to is actually the question that you asked, TJ, in your video. And that's basically the question, well, what has religion ever done for us? What are these good ideas? Because I talked about the fact that one of the key things about Peterson is effectively he's saying that we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater if we just embrace this sort of extreme fundamentalist atheism. It won't actually usher in a new age of reason at all. Instead, we are now seeing, and I think it's Peterson who's made this point previously, I would argue we are living in one of the more superstitious and anti-scientific periods of human history, with some of the ideologies that are being promoted right now on the world stage, particularly in the West. Now, we've unshackled ourselves, though, in large numbers in the West from religious, well, certainly religious belief in the Judeo-Christian paradigm. There's a lot of people who are still signing up for New Age guru type stuff and for all sorts of other type, self-help, self-interested spiritualities. But the mainline Judeo-Christian tradition, certainly in the West, has experienced a decline. So we're throwing off religious shackles. We haven't, by doing that, found a new age of reason at all. In fact, we appear to be slipping into a brand new age of superstition and darkness, I would argue, intellectual darkness, right? And that's really the point that Peterson is making, that we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Now, in response to that point, and the point that I made about how religion does have ideas that are worth hearing and worth knowing in our society, you asked me a question. And here's the question that you asked.
There's these great moral truths in religion, mate. There's these great truths. Name one. Name a single fucking truth contained within religious text that humanity couldn't get from some other source. Name something about Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or any of those things. Name a concept in there that's useful to humanity on a pragmatic level that couldn't be equally useful in a secular context. Can you do it? That's my challenge to you. That's what I'm putting forth to you, sir.
Well, you've actually asked me two different questions here, TJ, two slightly different questions. So I'm going to answer both questions. The first question you've asked is, name a single religious truth that humanity couldn't get from some other source. That's actually quite easy to answer, and one of those, and very obvious truths, is the idea that human life is sacred. Now, obviously, for the belief that something is sacred requires a belief in the divine. It requires an underpinning religious philosophy to believe that things can be sacred, right? But that idea that human life is sacred is actually something that's quite important to us in our development, particularly in our understanding and development of things in the West. Our concept of human rights, the concept of the way in which we should and shouldn't treat human beings. They aren't just disposable commodities, that it is not right at all in the slightest to kill 6 million Jews purely based on their ethnicity. It's not right to kill people in the tens of millions in the gulags based on political affiliation or some other random thing where some neighbor spied on them and decided that they weren't conforming to what the state thought they should conform to, right? We understand, or well-thinking people who know how to see the world through the lens of reality understand that you should never do that to other innocent human persons. That something grave has gone on here. There has been a grave violation of their rights as persons. And the reason we have these ideas and we consider them to be such important sort of moral intuitions is because of this religious idea that our society grew out of, that human life is sacred, that every human life is sacred because every human life in the Judeo-Christian tradition is made in the image of God. And that confers on it a special status, right? Now, you might disagree with that, but that is one truth that definitely permeates our society. I would argue it's a very important truth, and it's a truth that comes from a religious source, and it has to come from a religious source because of the belief in the sacred nature of life, right? Second question you've asked is this: name a concept that's useful to humanity on a pragmatic level that couldn't also be useful in a secular context. Now, this is a very interesting question. The reason this question is interesting is because it actually proves the point I was making. If you can find truths that are found within religion that can also be applied and have pragmatic and good uses for us outside of religion, even if you are not a religious person and you applied that truth, you would still benefit from it, and you can apply that truth even if you're not a religious person, then that proves what? That proves that religion actually does have good ideas that are worth listening to. Because if the only things that religion offered the world were ideas and doctrines that had no practical application in the real world and couldn't be applied outside of that religious setting and had no meaning or purpose and did nothing good for us, then yeah, you would be right to say that we shouldn't listen to anything religious at all. But if we can find truths within religion that have good pragmatic uses outside of religion and could benefit anyone, regardless of whether they're religious or not, then guess what? That backs up the point I made before. It backs up what Peterson is saying, that we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I can name two straight off the top of my head, by the way, two truths in religion that have profoundly important and pragmatic applications outside of religion as well. The first one is this idea of moral equality. Moral equality, the reason we have an idea that every individual human person is morally equal, the reason we have that idea in the West is because of something that the Apostle Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament, wrote in one of his letters to a group of Christians in a place called Galatia. And when he wrote to that group of Christians, he said this: because of Jesus, and because of this belief we all hold in common about this guy called Jesus, there is now, therefore, no woman or man, no free or slave, no Jew or Gentile, all are one. Now that's me paraphrasing a little bit, but that's pretty much almost word for word what he said, paraphrased slightly, but that's exactly what he said to that group of Christians in Galatia. Because of Jesus and because of our belief in Jesus, so this religious concept, everyone is morally equal now. Your gender, your state in life, your ethnicity does not make you lesser or better than someone else. That is a very profound concept, the concept of moral equality, that every single person has moral equality. That is hugely profound. And once that Pandora's box, if you like, is opened, we are then set on the path to what we know today as the modern concept of modern liberalism. That sense of the individual is profoundly important, and that collectivism is not right, that the individual should always be considered along with the collective, that you never allow the collective to overrule and stomp all over the individual, right? Because the individual has their own unique moral worth. And every single individual is equal in their moral worth. You don't get to say, well, because I'm rich or because I'm this race or because I am this gender, I am more important than you are and I have power that you don't have, or I have some sort of moral status that you don't have. Now that's a profoundly important idea, and pragmatically we have and continue to apply that all over the show outside of religion. In the world at large, the community at large applies this principle left, right and centre, right? Very, very pragmatic idea. Second pragmatic idea, again, just off the top of my head, is the notion of marital fidelity. The idea that when you get married to someone, that you should not cheat on that person, that you should practice sexual exclusivity with that person. And when you promise them that you would never have sex with another person, that you actually work your hardest to live up to that promise and you don't go and have sex with other people. Now, again, that is a very, very pragmatic and important idea. We know that for the individual happiness and well-being of people in relationships, that if you are constantly having your trust violated in that most profound and intimate kind of way, your relationship is almost certainly, at best, it will flounder and struggle. More likely, it's just going to come to an end. Because there is that foundational element of trust is completely missing in your relationship. The fidelity of it is something so important to the two people involved, the two spouses, the husband and the wife who are involved in this relationship. But more importantly than that, we know that fidelity also builds a really important foundation of security for the children or any children that couple might happen to bring into this world. Because the children are in a situation where the fidelity that the parents have committed to and are sharing between the two of them in their relationship. They're not out having sex with other people. They're not risking the relationship. They're not bringing other parties into the relationship who present risk. We know that the children have a stability and they're dealing with these two adults, that they have committed themselves to each other in love, and that love, that those children are born into that love, and that love overflows in the way, hopefully this is what's happening, and this is what should be happening, I think, in healthy functioning relationships into the lives of those children. And also they have that security of knowing, this stability. And I've become ever more aware of this, the profound importance of this fidelity, since having children of my own. Several times my kids have asked me, Dad, because they've encountered a story about divorce, or they've met someone whose parents were divorced, and they've come to us really worried, and they've said, Mum and Dad, you're not going to divorce, are you? You're not going to break up, are you? I remember my wife and I had a fight one day about something to do with the finances, and it got a bit heated and a bit loud, and the kids overheard it. And they came to us really concerned, and they said, we've been crying because we thought you were going to get a divorce and that we were going to have to live in separate houses and we were going to break up. Now, we were able to sit down with them and say, no, that's never going to happen, because your mum and I have committed ourselves totally to each other for life. This is it. There is no backdoor option for us. We're in it. And so there is no running away. And so you can have trust, kids. And you should have seen the way their faces changed. Their whole countenance changed very quickly. And how relieved they were, and it's like this huge weight had been lifted off their shoulders, knowing that they were living in this very secure and stable environment. So marital fidelity, hugely important, and it's got lots of pragmatic applications, obviously, outside of religion as well, and for the rest of us in the world. And it indicates that religion has something good to say here. This is a very pragmatic idea, and you would have to argue, I think, and it's not at all unfair to say, that it is primarily your religious sources, your Judeo-Christian tradition in particular in the West, that holds this up and says this is the gold standard that we should all be striving for. And we recognise that not everyone can get there, and there are problems, and the world makes its presence felt in all sorts of difficult and awful ways, but this is still the gold standard we should all be striving for. Very good, very pragmatic idea, and it comes from religion. I think that's all I really want to say, TJ, in response to your video, apart from one other little point on perhaps a lighter note. And that was this, that people who are watching this back and forth between the two of us could be tempted to think, man, these guys are total polar opposites. They'll never see the world the same way. There's nothing they could agree on. They're just so strongly opposed. Now, yes, on some of these big metaphysical, existential questions, there is some disagreement and some strong disagreement between us. But there are also some things that we have in common. And I had a wee smile on my face when I was watching your video and you talked about the fact that you love Ken Burns and you love Johnny Cash. I also happen to love Ken Burns a lot. I've got his entire I think most of his documentary collection in my video collection. I think he's one of the best and most important documentary filmmakers that's ever made documentaries. And I absolutely love Johnny Cash. It's something that my father handed on to me, and it's something that I've already started to hand on to my children. So there you go. Just because you disagree with someone strongly on some big and profound issues, there is absolutely no need for this disagreement to become vitriolic hate of the other person. And I think it's really important that we understand that point. You see, being irrational, hating another person, that's a choice that you make. You're not forced into it. No one makes you do that. That's a choice that you make. You have, every time you are confronted with disagreement, even when it's huge disagreement, you have a choice about how you're going to respond. And hopefully this video indicates to you that I've chosen to respond to TJ with my strength of conviction, but also with a civility and a charity as well. And I wish him no ill will. And as I said at the beginning, I'm sorry for the things I got wrong on my last video. And TJ, hopefully we can keep some sort of dialogue going. I think I'm hoping that the people on both of our channels might get some enjoyment out of it. And if nothing else, that those who come to your channel because you are a great theatrical showman will enjoy the showmanship of your responses to mine. As per usual, I'd love to know your thoughts, so please let me know in the comments section below. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are there things I'm getting wrong? And if you like the sort of content I'm making and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon. There is a link in the description below, and there is a link on screen at the end of this video. Thanks for watching. See you next time on Left Foot Media.